Years after returning to England from a magical kingdom called Narnia, a boy named Edmund tries to join the British Armed Forces, but he's told that he's too young. After his sister Lucy enters the room to call him so they can head home, Edmund complains about the age requirement needed to join the army, as he talks about being treated like a regular kid, even though he was once king of Narnia. Lucy mentions that no one knows that because it was in another world. After a while, they head home to meet their uncle, Harold, who ignores them while reading a newspaper. As Edmund makes funny faces in front of Harold, his son, Eustace, comes to the living room and reports this to his dad. Edmund looks shocked by this, but as he's about to run toward Eustace, Lucy calls him back and tells him that they've just received a letter from their older sister, Susan. Following this, Lucy heads to her room to read the letter, and she learns that Susan and their brother, Peter, are enjoying themselves in the United States.
Susan and Peter are the lucky ones.
She eventually ends the letter by telling Lucy and Edmund that their mom would like them to stay in England for a few more months. After reading the letter, Lucy complains about having to stay in England for longer, and even though Edmund feels the same way, he says she's at least lucky to have her own room in Harold's house while he's stuck with their uncle's stubborn son. Almost immediately, Edmund asks if Lucy has seen the ship in the painting on the wall, and she mentions that it's actually Narnian-like. Edmund then says it reminds him of what they're missing in Narnia. As Lucy stares at the painting, she says that the water in it looks like it's moving. Eustace enters the room and can't seem to understand why they keep talking about Narnia because he doesn't think it's a real place. He also mentions that they only came up with it because they've read too many fairy tale books. Edmund says they don't read useless books like him, but Eustace gets pissed and mentions that reading fairy tale books makes them a hideous burden to him.
Always the sort that become a hideous burden to people like me.
Edmund doesn't like his tone, and as they're about to fight, Lucy stops them and calls their attention to the moving water in the painting. Before they realize what's happening, the water starts entering the room, and Eustace looks shocked. He then grabs the painting to destroy it, but as Lucy and Edmund try to get it from him, it falls on the ground and starts filling the room with water. As they nearly drown in the water, they swim back to the surface and find themselves in Narnia. Eustace looks confused as to what's happening, but as Lucy sees a ship called the Dawn Treader headed toward them, she tells the boys to leave the way. They then struggle to swim well in the sea, but the new king of Narnia, Caspian, shows up to help Lucy. She looks surprised to see him, but this helps her and Edmund confirm that they're in Narnia. As Caspian and his men then try to help them board his ship, Eustace complains about this and says that he wants to go back to England.
I want to go back to England!
After they all eventually board the ship, Lucy asks Caspian if he was the one who called for them, but he says he didn't do that. Edmund doesn't seem to care, and he says he's just happy to be in Narnia again. Almost immediately, they hear Eustace yelling at a mouse named Reepicheep, who comes close to him. Reepicheep then explains that he was only trying to help Eustace expel the water in his lungs. Eustace cannot believe that the mouse can talk, and as he says it's likely a prank, he walks away and sees a minotaur who also speaks to him. Eustace is shocked by this, and as he tries to understand what's happening, he passes out. Caspian then tells the Minotaur to take care of Eustace. Following this, he introduces Edmund and Lucy to the crew members on the ship as the High King and Queen of Narnia. Shortly after, Caspian takes them into his cabin and tells them that the ship is headed to a place called Lone Islands. As Edmund and Lucy wonder why he's going there, Caspian mentions that he's on a quest to find the 7 lords of Telmar, who were his late father's friends who fled Narnia when his uncle tried to forcefully take the throne.
7 lords of Telmar.
After showing them a map of Narnia, which has lone islands on it, Lucy asks if there's anything beyond the place. The ship's captain, Drinian, says it's uncharted waters and that there have been tales of creatures like sea serpents living there. Edmund finds this funny because he doesn't think sea serpents are real, but Drinian just stares at him. Shortly after, while Lucy is asking Edmund what would happen if they get to the edge of the world, Eustace wakes up and comes over to meet them. He then complains about how they're always talking about about things that aren't real. Repicheep cannot seem to understand why he's always angry, but Eustace mentions that he was kidnapped and held against his will. Caspian hears this and says that they saved his life, but Eustace still talks about reporting them to the British consulate. Just then, one of the crew members on the ship informs Caspian that they're close to Lone Islands. As he looks at the island from the ship, Caspian finds it strange that there aren't any Narnian flags in sight.
Not a Narnian flag in sight.
Drinian says it's suspicious, and Edmund suggests preparing a landing party for when they get there. Drinian then mentions that he'll only take orders from Caspian because he's the current king, and even though Edmund looks disappointed, he says it's fine. Following this, Caspian tells Drinian that they have to use the smaller boats to get to the shore before they decide what to do next. After they reach the island, Caspian and the others notice that the place looks deserted. They also hear a bell toll, and Caspian tells Repicheep to stay back with Drinian's men, while he, Edmund, Lucy, and Eustace go ahead to see what's really happening on the island. He adds that if they don't make it back to the shore by dawn, Drinian and his men need to come for them. As they walk around the island, Eustace peeps into a nearby building and sees a scared family inside. Instead of telling Caspian and the others about it, he says he didn't see anything.
Yeah, looks like nobody's in, so do you think we should head back?
Edmund then tells him to come and guard the entrance to the hall they're about to enter. Before they leave him there, Caspian gives Eustace a sword, and he tells them not to worry because he'll guard the entrance well. Following this, Caspian, Edmund, and Lucy enter the hall and see a book with some cancelled names on it. As they think about what it could mean, they realize that it's a book for slave traders. Before they can do anything, some slave traders come down from the ceiling to attack them. They fight quite well against them, but as one of them brings Eustace inside the room and threatens to kill him, Caspian and the others drop their weapons. One of the slave traders then tells his men to take Eustace and Lucy to the market, while Caspian and Edmund should be thrown into the dungeon. Caspian cannot believe this, and he says he'll make them pay for what they're doing, but one of the slave traders jokes that someone will pay for him when he's put up for sale. After getting thrown into the dungeon, Caspian repeatedly kicks the door to see if it can open, but this doesn't work. Just then, he and Edmund hear a voice in the dungeon telling them that banging on the door is of no use because they'll never get out. As Caspian moves closer to see who is talking, he sees a lord named Byrne, who is one of the 7 lords of Telmar. Caspian looks shocked to see him, and as he says who he is, Byrne greets him well because he knew Caspian's father. Almost immediately, they hear some villagers shouting outside, and as Edmund peeps out through the window, he sees a man named Rince, begging the slave traders not to take his wife away. The men don't listen to him, and his wife is taken onto a boat that is departing the island. As Caspian sees this, he asks Byrne where the innocent villagers on the boat are being taken.
Where are they taking them?
But he just tells the king to keep watching. Just as the boat then crosses a part of the sea, a strange green mist surrounds them and makes them disappear. Caspian and Edmund are shocked by this, and as they ask Byrne what happened to the villagers, he says he doesn't know. He then mentions that he and the other lords heard about the mist and tried to do something about it. However, after the other lords sailed away to find answers, none of them came back. As Caspian and Edmund continue listening to him, Byrne says that if they don't get sold by the slave traders, they'll be sent to the mist as a form of sacrifice. Edmund looks worried as he hears this, and he tells Caspian that they must do something to help Lucy and Eustace. Shortly after, Lucy and Eustace are put up for sale in the market. Lucy immediately gets sold, but as no one places a bid for Eustace, Drinian leads his men to destroy the market and attack the slave traders. Caspian and Edmund also escape to join the fight, and after a while they emerge victorious. As they return to their ship, Rince follows Caspian and begs the king to let him come with them to find his wife. Since he claims to be a good sailor, Caspian agrees to let Rince follow them, and he looks happy. Rince's daughter, Gale, also wants to come with him, but he says it's best if she stays back, and this leaves her disappointed. Almost immediately, Byrne shows up before them and gives Caspian an old Narnian sword. He mentions that it was given to him by Caspian's father, and that there are 7 of such swords available in Narnia. He adds that it was a gift from Narnia's creator, Aslan, and that he wants Caspian to keep it. Caspian then accepts the sword, but he gives it to Edmund just as they're about to board the ship. Following this, they begin their journey east of Lone Islands because that's where the mist is said to be coming from. After a while, Eustace tries to steal some fruits on the ship, but Reepicheep stops him.
Are you aware?
As he then gets Eustace to fight him, everyone watches them. Reepicheep eventually pushes Eustace to fall against a basket, and surprisingly, Gale happens to have been hiding inside it. Rince looks shocked to see his daughter, and as he wonders if she'll be sent away, Drinian gladly welcomes her on board. Lucy also introduces herself to Gale and takes her into the cabin. Following this, Reepicheep commends Eustace on the way he fought and says that he'll make him a good swordsman with some training. Shortly after, Drinian, Caspian, and Edmund see a nearby island and decide to stop the ship to rest on the shore. Later that night, after everyone is asleep on the island, some invisible creatures called dufflepuds silently walk around them. They then see that Lucy was reading a book before she slept, and since she can be useful to them, they carry her away. Lucy wakes up and tries to call for help, but they stop her from saying anything. After they get far away from the shore, they drop Lucy on the ground, and she tries to attack them, but they easily take away her sword because she can't see them. They then mention that they're giant beasts who will kill her friends if she doesn't do what they want. Lucy looks scared and asks what they want, and their leader says they need her to enter the house of the oppressor and find a book of incantations, after which she'll recite a spell that makes the unseen seen. As Lucy wonders where the house is, they open an invisible door and tell her to go inside. Lucy asks why they can't do it themselves, and their leader says they can't read. Following this, Lucy enters the house and the invisible creatures lock the door. Shortly after, Caspian wakes up and sees the footprints on the ground. He then alerts the others, and as they notice that Lucy is missing, they leave the shore to start looking for her. Meanwhile, Lucy finds the Book of Incantations, and as she opens it, she sees a spell that can make her pretty. Interestingly, Lucy has always felt that she isn't pretty enough because she doesn't look like Susan. Since the spell can change that, she tears out the page and keeps it. As she does this, she hears Aslan's voice calling her name, but she doesn't see anyone in the room. She then sees the spell to make the unseen seen, and she starts reciting it. Coincidentally, the Dufflepuds have just attacked Caspian and the others. Caspian looks shocked because he can't see the invisible creatures, but as they talk about being giant beasts, the spell works, and they slowly become visible. It then turns out that they are actually small creatures who are only posing as giants to scare people on the island. Edmund then confronts them and asks for Lucy, and their leader says she's inside the house. Just then, the house becomes visible, and Edmund and Caspian see where Lucy went. Inside the house, a man named Coriakin becomes visible, and as Lucy sees him, she looks shocked. Shortly after, she comes outside with him and introduces him to Edmund and Caspian.
This is Coriakin. It's his island.
The Dufflepuds then accuse him of making them invisible, and he says he only did that for their own good. After he sends them away from the front of the house, Coriakin invites the Narnians into his house. Lucy then asks why he made the Dufflepuds invisible, and he mentions that he did it to protect them from what lies behind the mist. As Lucy and the others look confused, Coriakin shows them a map of a place called Dark Island, which is where evil lurks. He adds that evil can take any form on the island, and that it seeks to corrupt all the goodness in the world. Lucy then asks how they can stop it, and Coriakin says that they'll have to break its spell by using all the 7 old Narnian swords, including the one Edmund is carrying. Caspian realizes that Coriakin has met the 7 lords of Telmar, and he asks where they went. Coriakin says he sent them to follow a blue star to a place called Ramandu's Island, which is where they'll place the 7 swords on Aslan's table. He adds that the swords will release a magical power that will break the spell, but they need to be careful because they'll all be tested on their way to the island.
Tested?
As he warns them not to fall to the mist's temptation, he shows them the blue star, and they start following it. After a few days, though, they lose the star during a storm, and Drinian expresses his concerns about continuing on the quest because they no longer know where they're going. As he suggests turning back, Caspian refuses to let this happen because there are people like Rince's wife who need to be saved from the mist. Later that night, Lucy has a dream in which she reads the beauty spell to make herself pretty like Susan. The mist appears in the room, and as she checks herself in the mirror, she realizes that she has become Susan. As she then leaves the room, she finds herself at a party with her brothers. After a while, she notices that there's no Lucy in her present world, and she realizes that she won't exist if she becomes Susan. When she returns to the room, she sees Aslan through the mirror, and he tells her that she shouldn't have tried to be someone else. As he adds that she needs to stop running away from who she is, Aslan leaves. Suddenly, Lucy wakes up from her dream and burns the page she took from Coriakin's house. Following this, the mist goes to where Caspian and Edmund are sleeping, and they also start having bad dreams. In his dream, Edmund sees an evil woman named the White Witch, telling him to join her and be her king. As he wakes up looking scared, Lucy gets him to be calm, and they realize that something is making them have bad dreams. The next day, they stop at a deserted island to see what they can find. While Caspian and the others are thinking of where to go first, Eustace just sneaks away to do things on his own. Shortly after, Caspian, Edmund, and Lucy see one of the seven lords lying unconscious inside a small pool of water that can turn things to gold. They also see his old Narnian sword inside the water, and they manage to get it out without any problems. Before they leave, though, Edmund gets tempted to turn some things into gold so he can take them back to England. As he tells Lucy that they'll be rich, Caspian says he can't take anything out of Narnia. Edmund looks pissed and says that he's not one of Caspian's subjects who will be told what to do. As he also mentions that he's tired of playing second fiddle and having people question his leadership, he starts fighting with Caspian. But Lucy gets them to stop because it's clear that something is trying to turn them against each other. The boys also realize this, and they head out of the cave together. Elsewhere, Eustace sees a part of the island with some gold treasures. He then thinks of how rich he could be and starts packing some of the gold.
Finally.
After a while, Caspian and the others are now ready to leave the island, but they notice that Eustace is not with them. Edmund suggests going to find Eustace on his own. Caspian offers to follow him. As they then look around the island, they see the place with the gold treasures. Almost immediately, they find Eustace's clothes already burnt on the floor, and Edmund looks sad because he believes Eustace is dead. After looking around, Caspian realizes that one of the lords of Telmar suffered the same fate on the island, and Edmund finds his sword. Elsewhere, Lucy and everyone on the ship see a dragon headed toward them. As it lands on the ship's mast and nearly breaks it, Drinian and his men try to kill it, but it eventually leaves and grabs Edmund on the island. Edmund looks scared and doesn't know what to do, but the dragon eventually shows him that he's Eustace. Edmund cannot believe this.
Got to be joking.
And as he takes Eustace to meet the others, he mentions that his cousin likely got tempted by the treasure, which then turned him into a dragon. Edmund asks if there's a way to change him back, but Caspian says he has no idea. Edmund looks sad to hear this, and as they all think of what to do next, Caspian suggests spending the night on the island. Later that night, Reepicheep sees Eustace crying and goes to console him. He also mentions that Eustace needs to believe that something as extraordinary as turning into a dragon only happens to extraordinary people. The next morning, Lucy wakes up and sees the blue star again, so she alerts the others and gets them to return to the ship to continue their journey. Following this, they eventually reach Ramandu's island and see some food on a table inside a castle. Before they eat the food, Caspian and Edmund see three other lords trapped in a spell that makes them unconscious while they're still breathing. They then realize that the table containing the food is Aslan's table.
This is Aslan's table.
As they pick up the 3 new swords, they add it to the ones they had before and place it on the table. Nothing initially happens because they need 1 more to make it 7, but they eventually see the blue light fall from the sky. It then turns out that the blue sky is actually a lady named Liliandil, who is Ramandu's daughter. She then mentions that she's their guide and that they're free to eat anything they want from Aslan's table. Before they do this, Edmund asks what happened to the lords on the island, and she mentions that they were sent to sleep because they were threatening violence upon each other, even though such an act is prohibited at Aslan's table. Following this, she shows them the Dark Island, but Caspian mentions that they still have just 6 swords. Liliandil says the last one is on the island, but that they'll need great courage to get it. After a while, they begin their journey to the Dark Island, and Reepicheep also encourages Eustace not to be scared.
You're a dragon!
As they get there, the mist enters the ship and starts playing tricks on their minds. While Caspian sees his dad, who calls him a disappointment for how he has been ruling Narnia, the White Witch appears to Edmund again and offers him the chance to be her king, but he refuses because he knows that she's dead. Suddenly, they hear someone telling them not to come to the island. As they move closer, they see that it's a lord named Roop who is holding the last sword. Even though he keeps telling them to go away, Eustace carries him and drops him on the ship. After Caspian introduces himself as the king of Narnia, Roop tells him to turn the ship back because the island is dangerous. Since they already have the last sword, Caspian agrees to do this. But Roop warns him not to think of anything that will make the mist know his fears. Unfortunately, Edmund has already thought of something, and as he looks disappointed, a sea serpent appears in the water and attacks their ship. Eustace then fights the serpent, but he eventually gets knocked down. As he then manages to weaken the serpent by spitting fire on it, Roop is unaware that Eustace is helping them, and he throws his sword at the dragon. Eustace gets hurt in the process, and he quickly flies away while the others look worried that the last sword is stuck to his body. After a while, he lands on Ramandu's island and sees Aslan nearby. As he looks shocked, Aslan changes him back to a boy and takes him to the castle. Eustace then picks up the last sword and heads toward Aslan's table. Meanwhile, on Dark Island, Caspian and the others struggle to fight off the sea serpent. Edmund also tries to use himself as bait to get the serpent killed, but he nearly loses his life in the process. Elsewhere, Eustace nearly drops the last sword on Aslan's table, but the mist draws him back. He eventually manages to get past the mist and drop the sword to release the magical power Coriakin talked about. As the White Witch appears to Edmund again, he notices that his sword is now glowing, and this makes him realize that the 7 old Narnian swords are now together. Following this, he stabs the sea serpent, and the White Witch cries out in despair as she disappears. The serpent also gets destroyed, and the spell on Dark Island gets lifted. Caspian and the others look happy about this, and as the mist disappears, they see the Narnians who have been sacrificed over the years. Rince sees his wife in one of the boats, and he jumps into the water to meet her with Gale. Just then, Eustace shows up near the ship and looks happy as he tells Caspian and his cousins that he's now a boy again. Reepicheep is happy for his friend, and he jumps into the water to rejoice with him.
It's sweet!
After a while, they see an island nearby and wonder if it's Aslan's country. Since they're in no rush to leave, they head to the island on a boat. When they get there, Eustace sees Aslan walking with them toward a tall wave on the island. As Caspian, Edmund, Lucy, and Reepicheep also see him, Aslan says they did a good job and that their journey is about to end. Lucy asks if they're in Aslan's country, but he says it's beyond the wave. Caspian asks if his father is there, but Aslan says he can only find out by himself. However, he warns Caspian that if he goes beyond the wave, he will never return. He then walks toward it, but eventually decides against going through because he's not sure his dad would be happy happy with him for giving up what he died fighting for. As he says he wants to be a better king for his people, Aslan says he already is. Almost immediately, Edmund tells Lucy that he thinks they should go home too. Lucy says she thought he wanted to stay in Narnia, but Edmund mentions that he loves England and would love to be with their family.
But I love home. And our family is...
Following this, Reepicheep heads toward Aslan and asks for his permission to go to his country because it's something he has always wanted. Aslan grants him permission to do this, and Reepicheep says goodbye to Caspian, Edmund, and Lucy. Eustace doesn't want his friend to leave, but Reepicheep says it has been an honor to fight beside him. Eustace cries as he hears this, and Reepicheep then leaves for Aslan's country. After this, Lucy asks Aslan if she and Edmund will still get the chance to come to Narnia again. Aslan then says they can't come again because they've grown up like Susan and Peter. Lucy asks if he'll visit them in their world, and Aslan says he'll be watching them always. As Aslan also mentions that they'll meet again one day, he opens a portal for them to head back to England. Before they leave, Caspian tells them that they're the closest thing he has to a family.
You're the closest thing I have to family.
He then hugs them and says goodbye to them. Just as they get to the front of the portal, Eustace asks if he'll still be able to come back, and Aslan mentions that Narnia might need him soon. Following this, Edmund, Lucy, and Eustace return to their world and find themselves in the flooded room. After the water returns to the painting, Eustace smiles and puts it back on the wall. As they then hear his mom calling him, they stare at the painting one more time before heading downstairs to meet her. Even though Eustace initially struggled to believe that Narnia was a real place, he eventually realized that his cousins weren't just making up fairy tale stories about the place. After he also turned into a dragon, he learned to be a better person and played an important role in getting rid of the mist. Eustace's journey shows that even the most skeptical and stubborn people can end up making a difference when they open their minds and step up to help others.